Welcome to Dave Talks Ball in this September 26th, 2024 episode. Folks, it is Prediction Thursday, and you know what kind of feels that gives me. All the work, all the labor throughout the week put together, and we get to put our picks on the line. There's no hiding. Again, SEC Unfiltered, guys. It's unfiltered. We're going to give you takes. We aren't fence riders. We're not going to stay in neutral. We're going to give you hard takes here, folks. So that's what gets me excited. Everybody within the SEC Unfiltered family works very hard throughout the week, prepping. We'll continue that through basketball and baseball as well. But for football, it gets me jacked. It really tickles my fancy from a standpoint of we get to discuss SEC football predicted. It's week 5, and the season is just blowing by, guys. I'm fired up about this week, actually, overall. Very fired up about this week's slate. I feel like we got some under-the-radar games. We'll talk about that in a minute. But on a serious note, let's keep the people in the Florida Panhandle and the Big Bend in Florida in your prayers. They're going to get hammered tonight. Looks like the Cat 4 hurricane is coming in. Prayers for them. It's going to come up to Georgia, too. I'm out of Atlanta, so it's going to impact the Southeast quite a bit. It's going to impact the Southeast quite a bit. Even Kirby Smart, the Georgia head coach, mentioned their travel plans may have to change up a little bit. I don't know if they went over to Birmingham tonight. Athens to Birmingham in a bus, probably about 3.5 hours. 4 probably. I mean, it could be done. I mean, they're definitely not going to fly in the middle of the tropical storm that's supposed to be in Atlanta tomorrow. So maybe they went tonight. Maybe not. They wouldn't chuck me if they bust over. I said the new DFO, Director of Football Ops, Mark Robinson, who I worked at Texas A&M with, who just started in August with Georgia. He's used to going on Thursday nights with Jimbo, who go back to his Florida State and Texas A&M days. So he could put together a Thursday night flight itinerary. I promise he could. So Georgia will be fine, but to my point, they're having to adjust because this hurricane is going to affect people all around the Southeast, lives, much more things more important than football. But big episode tonight. Big guest tonight, by the way. Probably the biggest, definitely the biggest guest we've had on the Dave Talks Ball show, the 4 weeks we've been involved. But ESPN's college football writer, Chris Lowe, will join us tonight to discuss all things SEC. We'll talk a little Lane Kiffin. We'll talk about the Tennessee Volunteers, how they've looked. Kalen DeBoer, when Chris was down there doing it behind the scenes his first week in Tuscaloosa, taking over as the head man. We have a big one in Tuscaloosa, folks. Speaking of, it's the Showdown in T-Town. Is it the game of the year? We will discuss. Then we have a must-win at Jordan-Hare for both Auburn and Oklahoma. Some unknown question marks at the quarterback spot for both teams. That'll be an interesting one over in Jordan-Hare. And then a springboard game. It's a springboard game to me over in Arlington. I just think across the board, it's a pretty big spring game for that. Because, I think the winner of that, and I heard if Arkansas wins this game, College Game Day may be in Fayetteville next week. College Game Day may be in Fayetteville next week with a win. With a win. It's kind of wild to say. I looked up. I was like, it's got to be kind of it's no offense to obviously Arkansas or definitely not Tennessee, but it's like, that's College Game Day for week 6. And I looked at the slate. You got Florida State, Clemson. That's probably the one they circled preseason. Yeah, we may be there, folks. So that's an interesting one. But heard they could be there. Maybe they go to College Station again. Maybe it's too soon. But A&M does host Missouri, who is on a bye week. Remember, we got 5 teams on bye weeks this week in the SEC. We got essentially the former SEC East. You got Tennessee, Vandy, Missouri, Florida, and South Carolina. Yeah, the kind of old SEC East. Is who's on a bye week. It's not a big slate. It's 4 conference games and a non-conference game between South Alabama and LSU to top off the night as well. But before we sit down, we're waiting for Chris to come on. He's supposed to be joining us around 8:05. But the last time, going back to the Alabama-Georgia game, the Showdown in T-Town, everybody's going to be there. You got the who's who of the college football media, College Game Day, Josh Pate, the SEC Unfiltered channel will be there for the tour. I won't, but Chris Phillips already has boots on the ground in Hoover. He's already in the 205, folks. That's the Birmingham area code if you didn't pick up the hint there. But he's in Birmingham already, getting ready to invade Tuscaloosa tomorrow. Again, everybody will be there. Game of the year so far in college football. But when was the last time Alabama, you've probably seen it all week, that Alabama was an underdog at home? It was 2007, folks. My senior year in high school, actually. I remember the LSU-Alabama game, 2007, Les Miles. winner had a real shot to win the SEC West. Obviously, LSU did. They went on to win the national championship with 2 losses. But Les Miles, and then I was at that game. Very close game, down to the wire game. I think Alabama had a 4th and 7 opportunity to stop, and I think they hit early Doucette, Matt Flynn, to early Doucette for a touchdown. And then remember, Bama was going to try to score, and maybe it was Marlon Davis got beat by somebody, and John Parker Wilson fumbled, and they ended up Jacob Hester went over the top, and that ended up pushing it. Bama went on and struggled down the end of the line. But anyways, that's the point. The last time Bama was an underdog at home at Bryant-Denny Stadium, now Nick Saban Field, was 07, November in 07. What was going on in the world the last time Alabama was a home underdog? In 2007, Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 was leading the movies in the box office. Song, Irreplaceable, by Beyonce, You Must Not Know About Me. When I saw that, I was like, what song was that? And I said that. Gas, $2.85. Boy, would we love to have that. Boy, would we love to have that right now. We would love to have that price right there. Tim Tebow, the Heisman that year. Tim Tebow won the Heisman that year. And then finally, the highest rated show on TV back in November of 2007 was American Idol. So again, the movie box office, Spider-Man 3 is killing it. Beyonce's killing it. Gas is $2.85. People would give their left foot for that right now. Tim Tebow is about to embark on his first Heisman Trophy. Well, he's only Heisman Trophy, but his Heisman Trophy in 07. And then TV, American Idol was atop the charts in 2007. The last time the Crimson Tide was an underdog heading in to Bryant-Denny Stadium. But here he is. Let's bring him on right here. ESPN's Chris Lowe join us. Chris, what is going on, man? I appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
No, it's good to be with you. You're right. It's been a long time since we've been in a situation where the Tide have been an underdog at home. Saban's first year. So really, once he got that program going, Dave, they never were underdog at home.
No.
So I don't really count that 07 season because he was trying to sort of get everything squared away and put his stamp on it. So after that, and for me, remember even that year, LSU came into to Bryant-Denny, and LSU won the championship that year, and that game went to the wire. Alabama nearly beat them. Would have been a big upset, but no, this is the first time that we've seen Bama be an underdog, and like you said, 07, which was Nick's first year. So, and I can see why Georgia is favored. I don't think that they're a lot better, but they've been with their coach in these situations a lot more than Alabama has, with this being Kevin's first year there. So we're going to find out a lot about Alabama. This is their first, real test. They played Wisconsin. They're a better football team than Wisconsin. Georgia went to a neutral site and beat Clemson. Clemson, I think, probably a lot better than they looked in that first game, and may well indeed win the ACC, at least play for the title. But no, I think this is going to be a great football game. Two of what I think are clearly four or five of the best teams in college football right now.
Again, guys, ESPN senior writer Chris Lowe, go give him the follow at CLowe ESPN. I mean, if you don't know who Chris Lowe is, you've probably been living under a rock, especially from college football news. He is. I feel like you have connections all around the league, especially the SEC, but across college football. Chris, we appreciate you joining us. But Chris, right off the top of the bat here, I talked about this on the show on Monday. Would you agree with this statement? And it's okay if you don't, but would you say there's about 5 teams in the SEC and there's probably like a gap after that? You got Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Georgia. And those are just those 5 and probably a little bit of a gap. And then Missouri, LSU. What's your kind of feel through 4 weeks?
I would say it's hard because everybody's playing a different schedule at this point. And I think it's, when you get 4 weeks in, or some schools only played 3, it's really sort of hard to make a real assessment. From what I've seen and having been around some of the different schools in the spring, et cetera, I think Texas and Georgia are probably maybe AA, and then I think Alabama, Tennessee, and Ole Miss are maybe just a notch under them. The good thing is we're going to see most of those teams play each other. Yeah. Alabama and Tennessee play on October 19th. Texas and Georgia play on October 19th. Ole Miss and Georgia play in November. So most of those teams are going to play each other. Georgia, I think, really has the toughest schedule, though, because they've got to play. They got to play this weekend at Alabama. They got to play at Texas and at Ole Miss and they go to Tennessee in November. So in November they play both Ole Miss and Tennessee. I said when the season started, and I believe even more strongly now, is I don't think we're going to see an unbeaten team in the SEC this year. I just think the league is too hard. There are too many good teams, and it's going to be difficult to navigate your way through any of those five that you mentioned without losing a game.
Christian, we brought up Alabama and Georgia a couple times, so let's dig deep into this one. Who do you think has the most pressure on them in this game, Kalen DeBoer or Kirby Smart? You brought up the schedule, which I think is a phenomenal point by you, Chris, because if Georgia were to lose this game, like you said, you still have three very losable games, like you mentioned, at Ole Miss, at Texas, and then you're hosting Tennessee the second to last week of the year, all losable. You lose this, again, I'm not saying they're not going to make the playoffs. It's just a much tougher path. Who do you think's under the most pressure here between the two head coaches?
Well, I mean, I think in these type of games, there's pressure to go around, to be honest. I'm not trying to wiggle out of your question. I think it's really Kalen, because this is going to be the first time with Georgia's, Kirby Smart coming back in there. Alabama has owned Georgia, but they owned them under Nick Saban. Now, you know what the narrative is going to be, Dave. If Alabama loses this game, Kirby comes back in there. I mean, Georgia hasn't lost a game to anybody not named Alabama since the 20 season. And if he goes in there and beats Kalen, I think Dan Mullen, who's obviously doing TV now. But if Kirby goes in there and beats Kalen, then all of a sudden, you're going to say, well, it's going to be, well, gosh, Saban's gone and Kirby waltzes right back in and wins. So I think maybe most of the pressure is on my way of thinking. I think I see it both ways, but probably be on Kalen DeBoer. They both have hard schedules, though. And I mentioned the dog schedule. Listen, it's not like Alabama's got a cakewalk the rest of the way. They have to play at Tennessee. They have to play, I think, at Oklahoma. They've got LSU left. They've got Auburn, which is always, everybody says, well, Auburn's struggling. Well, look at last year's Auburn game. It took a miracle for Alabama to win on the Plains last year. So they still have a very difficult schedule remaining as well. I don't think quite the road schedule that Georgia does. But no, I think the winner just sets up pretty nicely. Listen, I think at the end of the day, Bama and Georgia are both going to be in the playoff. I really do. I think they're both that talented, and I don't put it past the Georgia or Alabama team if they do have two losses getting in. I think all those teams you mentioned with two losses, if they can get at least one or two quality wins over and above those two losses, have a great chance to be in the playoff when it's all said and done.
Would you agree? Probably Texas, Ole Miss probably have the easy. I say Texas, Ole Miss. I'd throw Tennessee in there too. Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Ole Miss, Texas, and Tennessee probably have the easier paths. I would probably say, if anybody, just due to schedule as we stand right now.
Yeah, I think Ole Miss does. I think they've got the easiest. I don't think there are any easy schedules. They've got the most
manageable. Yeah,
I think they got the most manageable schedule. I think it's probably the best way to put it. But they get Georgia in Oxford, which I think helps. They've got LSU. Really, the first game, and listen, Columbia, South Carolina is a hard place to play.
Mm-hmm.
They get a little bit of a break because that game's not at night. Ole Miss does, but they've got they've got Kentucky, and then South Carolina, and then they go to LSU, which will be the first time that they won't be favored in a game, and they might even be favored in that game, but certainly they'll be favored the next two games. So you might see Ole Miss be. I think they'll probably be unbeaten when they go into LSU in October. And I think, again, not having to play Alabama this year is a bit of a break. And then playing Georgia and Ole Miss is a break. So I think they've got the easiest schedule. Tennessee still has to play Georgia and Alabama, one on the road, one at home. But if they can get past, they got past Oklahoma this past week. They're off this week, which comes at a good time because they had both of their tackles were hurt and had some other injuries.
Campbell,
they go to Arkansas October 5th, which I think is a tricky road game for Tennessee because it comes right before that stretch of Florida and Alabama at home. But I think if they get through that that Arkansas game on the 5th, I think Tennessee's got a great chance to make the playoff.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you, because if they were to beat Arkansas, beat Florida at home, and then were to beat Alabama at home this year in Neyland, that's almost – I mean, it's early. Again, it's early. I mean, it's
right.
Or mid of October. But they almost punched that ticket to the playoffs. I don't see them losing 3 games on the back end of that schedule. They still got who? Mississippi State, Kentucky, at Georgia, and Vandy in the league play. I think UTEP maybe.
Yeah, I think Tennessee will be favored in every game they play the rest of the way, but Georgia. Alabama might be close. It might be Tennessee by a couple, Alabama by a couple, or pick them. But I think the only one of their games left, Dave, that they're definitely going to be an underdog in will be Georgia and Athens.
Yeah, 100%. You brought up a good point too, Chris, about the line for LSU, Ole Miss, and a couple, because LSU has South Alabama this week. Then they're off. Like you said, Ole Miss has Kentucky and then South Carolina. Yeah, what that line will be interesting heading into that game at night in Baton Rouge. All right, Chris, I have to ask you this. I have to ask you this because, again, I know you're close to a ton of coaches around the SEC, a lot of head guys. What do you think the coaches around the country's feel is on the Florida job right now? I know you talk to a lot of guys. You can say certain things. You divulge what you want to say. But I would love to hear your takes from you talking to people with inside the industry. I've talked to people. I just kind of want to compare and contrast notes here, see what you think from gathering from these head coaches, what they compare that job to Florida now compared to what they did probably 10, 15 years ago.
Well, it doesn't look as good as it did when Urban Meyer left it. Although a lot of people would tell you when Urban Meyer left, the infrastructure of that program was not in great shape. Coaches, I think, Dave, a lot of times the right coaches, the good coaches, the guys with the right fit make a program look a lot better than it was. I mean, Alabama had not been setting the world on fire when Nick came in there in 07. They'd had some bad years. They'd gone through quite a few coaches. Go back and look at LSU, the decade prior to Saban getting at LSU. They had a bunch of non-winning seasons. Tennessee sort of wandered in football wasteland forever. And then Heupel comes in his second year. He's got them beating Bama, beating Florida, and winning the Orange Bowl. So getting the right coach at a place that's got the resources. And I think now this is the most important thing. Going somewhere that will play, knows how to play, is committed to playing the NIL game, and has the kind of funds in their collective that they could go out and be competitive. That's just what it's the way it is. It's not going to change. You look at Ole Miss. You give Ole Miss and their collective, Walker Jones, and Lane has talked about that multiple times now. They were sort of trending behind a little bit back before, he had the decision whether to go to Auburn or stay at Ole Miss. And they raised a ton of money. They beefed that collective up. And they were as aggressive as anybody in the transfer portal this past year and in the high school ranks. And you look at their roster now, it's one of the more talented rosters in college football. So that, to me, when you start talking about what jobs are most attractive, the first thing I'm probably going to look at as a head coach is what are the resources and what's your collective like, because that's just where it is. We don't know what it's going to look like 3 years from now, how much this revenue sharing model that's out there right now, how much it's going to change. Are we going to go to collective bargaining where players are employees and you have a cap? I mean, all those questions are yet to be answered, but I think that's the main thing. But I look at Florida this way. Florida is in the most, if not one of the most, if not the most fertile recruiting grounds. They've got tradition, they've got history, they've got a fan base that is hungry. And, you got to stay on the right side of that passionate fan base. Clearly Billy hasn't been able to do that, but a lot of guys before him haven't been able to do it. But even those guys that got fired, McElwain, Dan Mullen, they went to SEC championship games. It wasn't like they were going 6-6 every year. They went to title games in the conference. They didn't win, and in some of those games they got blown out, but they were at least swimming in those waters. And I think whatever happens, and I really don't see Billy making it. I think that's irreparable. So whoever comes in there, and the powers that be at Florida, probably needs to look in the mirror and make sure that they've got everything aligned the right way for this next guy to come in there and get Florida back to where Florida wants to be. Listen, having been in the business, if you don't have the right alignment at a university, I'm talking about president, board, AD, coach, and now your collective, you got to throw your collective in there too, then you really don't have much of a chance. I don't care where you are. And that's what Nick did very quickly at Alabama. They won, 6 or 7 games in his first year. But what he did that first year is he got it lined up, and he had full support of Mal Moore, his AD, his president, Robert Witt. They were all in line, and they got that thing where within a year it was where it needed to be, and you see what happened. I don't think Florida, when you look at it from 1,000 feet away, is any different than Texas or Alabama, Ohio State. I think it's got still that Maserati type feel to it, but even with the Maserati, you got to take care of it. You got to maintenance, you got to keep it maintained. You got to make sure it's got all the things that it needs. And I don't think if they get the right person in the right alignment, there's no way or there's no really excuse for Florida not to be a top 10 program currently.
No, Chris. And I feel like another part of this aspect, and again, the job's not vacated yet, but me and you inevitably agree. It's not a matter of if, but when for Billy Napier. I think the other part for Scott Strickland, and it sounds like he's probably going to be around from what they said to hire a third football coach, which is, again, I don't know the intricacies of all what happened in there, but it's kind of amazing. You get 3 football coaches in today's world, but the college football playoff calendar's got to change that up a little bit, right, Chris? Like when you're going to go hire a guy, I mean, unless you're hiring a guy, it's not in the playoffs, but the calendar being what it is, and with the transfer portal and trying to retain the kids you want, that would be interesting. Like, again, let's throw the name out there. Lane Kiffin, his name's going to be at the top of the Florida board. If Ole Miss is in a deep playoff run or just the playoffs like we think they probably will make, I mean, Florida's got to wait for him. Will they be willing to pass up a whole December portal? Because what now, Chris? The national championship games, I think, January 19th, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is I don't think anybody knows, me included, who's going to make this next hire. How tenuous or precarious his position is as AD, or how precarious it's not. I know some people have said, well, he's going to be the one that makes the call on Billy. Let's say that's true or not true, I think there's enough that has happened there that if he is the guy that hires this next coach, he ain't going to be alone. There's going to be a lot of people that are right there, a part of that decision. You're right. It's rare, and this has nothing to do with Scott per se, but it's rare that an AD gets a third swing at it. If you've got 2 swings at it, you don't get it right, then you don't usually get a third swing at it. And this would be a third swing at it. And so there have been some other issues. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I know that the people that have a big financial stake in that athletic program certainly want to change. They're not very happy at all with what's happened. So I'm not going to sit here and say that Scott is going to be the guy all the way through, or he won't be the guy all the way through, because I don't know. It wouldn't be fair for me to say that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that's TBD. Now, let me say this. You're exactly right. I think one of the reasons that Billy hasn't already been fired is if you fire a coach before the 4th game, look at what's already happened around the country. How many players just shut it down and say, you know what, I'm not playing anymore. I'm going to preserve my red shirt so I can transfer at the end of the season. I don't think there's any question that would have happened. Number 2, when you look at Florida staff, if you're Scott Strickland or upper administration at that university, who's going to be the interim coach? You're talking about 8 games potentially, 7, 8 games most of the year. Who's ready to do that? Who can keep everybody together? How many guys would you sort of have in that pool that you're considering? So you've sort of got to work through that. So you're right. There's a lot to sort of think about, and the calendar is different than we've ever seen it. You're going to have, unless you win your championship, your conference championship, you're going to be playing mid-December in the playoff. And whether it's Lane Kiffin certainly would be at the top of their list, a guy like Eli Drinkwitz. Missouri also has a chance to get in the playoff. Mm-hmm. Most of the people you're going to be looking at were probably going to be involved in some way, shape, or form in the playoff. And if you make it, let's use Lane hypothetically. If Ole Miss wins a couple games in the playoff, you're looking late December. And you got the transfer portal opening, I think the 9th or the 10th in December. You got signing day there, the early part of December. A lot of schools just aren't going to be able to wait. And you never say never. It's hard for me to see a coach with a playoff team who bolts for another job with his team in the playoff.
Unless it's maybe the group of 5 rep.
I hope we don't see that. I mean, I really
hope so. I hope we don't either.
But no, it's a lot more, to your point, Dave, it's a lot more difficult now than it's ever been because of the expanded playoff, because of the things we just laid out, to be able to quickly hire a football coach. I know people say, well, look at Alabama. They went and got Kalen DeBoer, who was a hot name. I mean, Norvell and DeBoer were the 2 guys they settled on. But remember, Nick didn't retire until January 10th. In this case, if Billy's not the coach in October, early November, or whenever, late November, that's You can't go, a month and a half without a football coach. Even DeBoer was there on the 12th. Nick had retired on the 10th. They lost some really good football players. Now, they brought in a couple good ones, but they lost perhaps the best safety in America, Caleb Downs, who was at Ohio State. They lost a receiver, a starter who went to Texas, the Bond kid. So they lost some good players. So think about if that happened at Alabama in a couple of days, what would happen potentially over the course of 3 or 4 weeks?
No, you're 100% right. Again, Chris Lowe joining us, a senior college football writer over at ESPN. Appreciated him joining us here. Chris, just 2 to 3 more questions here. I always feel like hey, let's get Chris on for 20 minutes. And me and you go into a deep dive. And I look up, it's 30, 45 minutes. But thoughts on year 2 down on the plains at Auburn for Hugh Freeze?
Let's be honest. It's not even close to what he expected. I spent some time with Hugh in July, and he felt like they'd be a lot further along than they are, certainly on offense. And they're not. I mean, they've turned the ball over at quarterback. They've not been able to be consistent at all on offense. Hugh's an offensive guy. He's won with different styles of quarterbacks at different places. He's always been a guy who's been able to get his quarterback to play at a high level. He hasn't been able to do that with either one of the kids they played. Now, in retrospect, if we all had a mulligan, he would have gone out and brought somebody else in. They looked at some guys. I think Cam Ward's the guy that they probably could have gotten potentially. I think he got about $1.5 million to go to Miami. Hugh didn't want to pay that kind of cash for a quarterback. He wanted to spread it around more, and felt like at that point that Peyton Thorne would be good enough and serviceable enough with the guys they were bringing in at receiver around him that they would be okay. Now, that hasn't been the case, so we'll see, what happens going forward. I know that when you look at a coach in his second year who's not getting the results in the field that a lot of people won't, well, most people don't. I mean, let's be honest, nobody on the plains is happy. I think the thing you got to look at is, well, how are they recruiting? Well, Auburn's recruiting at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Hugh wants to build that thing through recruiting, through the high schools, and then supplement through the portal as need be. So if you're an Auburn fan, I think you look at recruiting and see that they've been able to flip some key players. They've been able to win some battles against the teams they got to been on the field for players, Bama, Georgia, people like that. So that's a good sign. But in this league, even if you're recruiting at a high clip, you've got to show results pretty quickly. And I think the thing that hurts you, probably, quite honestly, is if you've seen some coaches come in the last few years and have success in year 2. Josh Heupel did it at Tennessee. Lane Kiffin did it at Ole Miss. Even going all the way back when Kirby came in. Kirby in his second year was in the national championship game. Now, Georgia was in a lot better shape.
Coming off back-to-back 10-win seasons with Coach Ring.
It's not like he had to build that thing up from the ashes. They were winning 10 games in most years under Mark Richt. So that's probably not an apples-to-apples comparison, because Auburn was not in good shape. Its roster was not in good shape at all when Hugh got there. So I think let's wait and see how they finish the season. Can they get a quarterback? Because clearly, Dave, he's got to go out and get a quarterback in the portal.
Oh, they'll probably I would assume they set the transfer portal quarterback market.
Nobody will be more in need and probably be more aggressive in trying to get a quarterback than Auburn this offseason. I think they tried to get, 2 years ago, the Hartman kid went to Notre Dame. I think Florida and Auburn both were in that.
Yeah.
So that's number one, getting the guy, the signal caller this offseason, and then getting some guys to grow clearly that have potential, and guys that are highly recruited from the high school ranks and grow up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, they're even in it for the high school 5-star kid committed to Notre Dame, Deuce Knight, but I don't think you roll with a freshman in if you finish with a losing record this year, which brings me to my point. It's wild to say in my lifetime, Chris, I'm 35, but that legitimately we're staring. If Auburn loses this weekend, you're staring at Florida and Auburn both having 4 straight losing seasons, 4 years together. I never would have guessed that would happen.
Well, no, I wouldn't either. But number one, the winds have changed, blow pretty quickly in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen great programs down before. Alabama, we talked about Bama earlier, LSU, Tennessee.
Yeah.
So it can happen pretty quickly. When you have a lot of coaching changes, which Auburn has, Florida has. I mean, that's always, if you look at sort of common denominators, it's change. you go through that decade of just basically nothing that Tennessee had. They had more chancellors and presidents and ADs and football coaches than they did wins. And, I don't care what business you're in. If you have that type of turnover, you're not going to win at a very high level. And I think both of the schools you just mentioned have had a lot of that, certainly at the coaching level. And when you're bringing in a new coach, remember you're bringing in new coordinators, new position coaches, quarterbacks, offenses, defenses are having to get used to new systems. So at some point, they've got to find the right guy. They've got to find some continuity, both of those schools. Hugh's in his second season. Billy's in his third season. Billy's certainly in much more trouble than Hugh is. But hey, if Auburn doesn't have a winning record this year, if they have a losing record, then all of a sudden for Hugh in year 3 becomes Armageddon. And they'll need to produce, and they'll need to, some of these kids they've signed who are really good players are probably going to have to play earlier than they really wanted them to initially.
No, you're 100% right. And to your point, administrations win championships, not coaches. 2 more questions here, Chris. Again, appreciate you joining. So you went to Tuscaloosa for, I think, the first week against Western Kentucky to kind of shadow Kalen DeBoer. Am I right in that? I read your article, but I couldn't remember what exact game.
Yeah, it was the first game week. It was the game week leading up to the Western game.
What's kind of the vibe around? I graduated from there, worked in football as a student worker. Again, that was back 2010 to 12. Haven't been back in that building in years. Well, what is kind of the vibe now internally there from you going back when Coach Saban was there to now? Not good or bad, just in general, what is kind of just a different feel?
Well, I don't want to say that people have exhaled because I think they're still working hard. I think there was this narrative because they were playing music at practice and it was just a little bit less regimented, that it was Club Med, and that's not the case at all. I just think Caleb's disposition and his temperament and the way he goes about things, it's not one of these where everyone's on edge all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different ways to coach. And I think Nick was one of those guys that, he liked to see when you push people to the edge, how they reacted, because you're going to be on the edge. You play football, you coach football, you're going to be on the edge most of the time, backs to the wall, whatever cliche you want to use. But Nick was he was so masterful at coaching that way, yet creating the kind of culture where guys had each other's back. There was a trust there. He brought in the right players that loved competition, that wanted to be coached hard and thrived under that. And it's hard sometimes to get those kind of guys on the recruiting trail. You never know for sure who's going to be like that. I think Kalen's also shown to this point that they're going to be really aggressive recruiting. They've got a really good recruiting operation headed up by Courtney Morgan. He's got a lot of people working under him. And we don't know for sure about recruiting classes until you get on the field, but boy, the early returns look pretty good. That people want to come play in Kalen's system. His offenses have been lights out everywhere he's been. He's won everywhere he's been. And you talk to guys like Jalen Milroe, Tyler Booker, guys who've been there and played under Nick. They like this sort of, whatever you want to call it, this atmosphere, this culture. Jalen told me he's never been more comfortable playing, felt more free to do and play the way he wants to. I think he played a lot last year looking over his shoulder. I don't know if that was really more Nick Saban or just the staff. He got better, and I give Saban and the staff credit. They pulled him aside after being benched in week 3 and say, "You're our guy." And from that point on, Jalen grew. But right out of the gate this year, you've seen him playing like he wants to play. Now that he faces his toughest test in Georgia, certainly the best defense they played, I think that's going to be one of the more fascinating storylines. But listen, it's hard not to like Kalen DeBoer, the way he goes about his business, the way he treats people. His players really like him. And watching that team and being there that week, the way they responded to him and rallied around him, they gave him the game ball after that game. It's different. And I think it took some getting used to from a lot of people in that building. But I think it's. I don't think Greg Byrne went out to get someone completely opposite from Nick Saban, but he sort of did in a lot of ways, and yet someone who also has a lot of the same values and ways to go about things as Nick. It's just he's a different person, and I think they're going to be really good. I know how much Kalen values the people around him, and you look at the way he put his staff together, the mix. He's a good listener. He surrounded himself with smart people, and I do believe they'll have a lot of success there at the capstone.
All right, Chris, specifically to this game this weekend, last two. Alabama wins if, Georgia wins if. We'll leave it with that.
Well, Alabama wins if Jalen Milroe doesn't make any mistakes and is able to hit some big plays down the field. That's where they really pulled away from Wisconsin is the big play. And Jalen throws the deep ball very well. He's dynamic at finding running lanes, and he's probably the fastest player on their team.
Oh, yeah.
If he has a big game, is able to generate those big plays and doesn't turn it over, I think Alabama wins. If Georgia can sort of put that umbrella around him and keep him in the pocket and cover down the field and not let him sort of get out during breakdown situations and run, I think they have a good chance at winning this game. I think Georgia's got to play in front too. This is not a game with that crowd at nighttime that they want to get down and have to play from behind, where Carson Beck's having to throw it 35 or 40 times. So if they can run the football, keep Milroe sort of at bay and not let him get started running the football, then I think that's the best scenario for Georgia to win. Georgia's going to be without probably its best offensive lineman, their guard, Tate Ratledge. So I think that's something to watch, that matchup there in the middle of that line of scrimmage. Alabama's interior front against Georgia's interior front. Who wins that battle, I also think will dictate in a lot of ways who wins this ballgame. I think it'll be a great game. I think it's going to be the best game we've seen so far. I think it's certainly the best matchup of the two best teams, 2 versus 4. And, Kirby's been awful good on these stages. I think he's 5-0 in his last games of top 5 teams playing each other. We'll see if he can make it 6-0.
No, I think you're right, Chris. You hammered it. That Tate Ratledge injury is why I'll give my prediction later in the show. But you're right. Some of these injuries Georgia has on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I know Michael Williams, Warren Brinson, and Jordan Hall may be back this week, but you talk to them a little bit over there. It's like, yeah, they're going to maybe be on a snap count a little bit too. Like, they're not going to be 100% back. So that's why you may give Bama a little bit of lane. But, Chris, man, I kept you a little too long. But, again, we could talk forever SEC football. But I truly do appreciate you joining us on the show tonight. Again, guys, I don't have to introduce him. He introduces himself here. Chris Lowe, ESPN senior writer for ESPN, joining us. Go give him the follow at CLow ESPN. Once again, Chris, I do appreciate you joining us on this a little bit later evening on Thursday night.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk ball.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate you, man.
Okay, see you guys.
Again, guys, Chris Lowe joining us, does a phenomenal job. I mean, he's the face of SEC football from a standpoint of, you guys pay attention to football. I'm preaching to the choir here. Y'all know who he is. He broke the Nick Saban retiring news. Real close with Lane Kiffin. Went behind the scenes with Kalen DeBoer. He has access like no one else has because he builds up trust. He has a good rapport with the coaches out here. Appreciate him taking the time tonight and talking to us. But as y'all know, I get fired up. It's Thursday, guys. We have to give predictions. There's no more hiding. Let's get to it. Let's get to the big one. Georgia at Alabama, 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone. Let's get right to it. Setting the tone, 7:30 p.m. Central Eastern Standard Time Zone. ABC, Georgia favored by 2. Point total 48.5. Setting the tone for you folks. This is a money game. This is a money game, folks. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about bets or anything like that from a money standpoint or anything like that. But overall, folks, this is a money game. This is a money game from top to bottom here. Players want to play in this game to put film out there against elite competition. These guys move up and down draft boards based on games like this. If you have little nitpicky injuries like Michael Williams, Warren Brinson, Jordan Hall, you're going to push to get through this throughout the whole week when they're with the trainer Ron Corson in Athens. They want to play in this game. And I hate to say it, even if they get shot up for it, like shot up to deal with the pain, you play in these games to get film for NFL personnel. You can move up draft boards off these games. This is one of the few things coaches, agents, and families even agree on. Now, specifically in this game, this could be the game of the year in the SEC regular season. Can Kirby Smart come into Bryant's court now at Nick Saban Field and exercise that demon? He is 1-5 against Nick Saban and Alabama. I got asked on a show earlier this week, is it an Alabama thing or a Nick Saban thing? It's got to be a Nick Saban thing because that's when the losses started. So I thought it was an interesting question, but definitely a Nick Saban thing. Again, College Game Day is going to be there. Obviously, Nick Saban, Donald Trump, Bryant Denny's opening up 30 minutes earlier just so people can get to their seats with the Secret Service being involved. The SEC Unfiltered Tour, Chris Phillips will be there. Who won't be there besides yours truly? But I'll be doing the post-game reaction for us. Remember, you come join me and Cole Thompson for that as well, right after all our games on Saturday. A massive game, right? But I don't think this is the massive. This is the biggest game of the year so far in college football. I don't think it will be the biggest game in college football at the end of the day. The 12-team playoff has changed a lot of that, folks. These teams could arguably play 3 times total. I don't think that happens because Georgia's schedule is so tough. But it is possible. It's going to be a fantastic measuring stick for both teams. Now, who needs it more? Chris thought Kalen DeBoer, and I'm going to agree to disagree with it. I think Kirby Smart. If Georgia loses to Alabama on Saturday night, it will now look like Kirby Smart has an Alabama problem and not a Nick Saban problem. He'll be 1-6 against Alabama. So in the comments, I'd love to hear who is under more pressure. Who needs this game more? And again, maybe pressure's not the right word. Who needs this game more? Kalen DeBoer or Kirby Smart? I think Kirby Smart. Again, because I think Georgia has a tougher schedule down the line. Me and Chris talked about it. They still got to go at Austin, at Texas in a couple weeks, at Ole Miss in November, and they host Tennessee in November. Alabama wins this. You feel pretty good about Bama getting the playoffs because, I mean, I think the only games they could really probably lose are at Tennessee, maybe Missouri at home, and then at LSU. But you feel good about Bama getting the playoffs with a win. Georgia, not necessarily still because they got 3 tough tests ahead. Will they probably? Sure. But I think for Kalen DeBoer, he's playing with house money. Now, if you got blown out at home, it's a different conversation. But this is the biggest game of the college football season so far. And it may end up being the biggest game of the year in the regular season. But both teams still have their goals and aspirations still in front of them like they haven't had in the past before. But what is going to happen? Look, Georgia's favored, rightfully so. However, I see quite a few people picking Alabama. And I think that's because people are real caught up in Georgia's game against Kentucky. Throw that game out the window from 2 weeks ago. It's irrelevant now. If you're picking Georgia to lose to Alabama this upcoming Saturday night because of what they did 2 weeks ago in Athens, you're going to be wrong. That is not going to be the same Georgia team, my friends. If you believe that, you are naive. Now, I do think Georgia has their own issues. And most of it's coming out of the training room, like I mentioned. They're banged up on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Tate Ratledge, probably their best overall offensive lineman, out. That's a legit loss. Michael Williams, likely going to play. He's not 100%. Warren Brinson, likely going to play. Not 100%. Jordan Hall, possibly. He's not 100%. I mean, injury-wise, I think Bama's pretty healthy. Quay Rusall, they're expecting to play. He had an ankle knee injury against Wisconsin. Malachi Moore had some concussion-like symptoms, but he wasn't even listed on the injury report the other day. So he's fine. He's going to play. Caden Proctor coming off the shoulder injury week 1 against Western Kentucky. He's going to play. And Elijah Pritchett. Bama's in a much better shape injury-wise than Georgia. But I think the key matchup here is I think Georgia's going to take a different approach defensively than they did last year in Atlanta. They tried to mush rush, spy Jalen Milroe, make him throw through the pocket. I think this year, Glenn Schumann, Kirby Smart try to bring pressures through the A-gap. The book's a little out on Jalen, and maybe not out, but hey, see what he can do when you blitz the A-gaps and you get him extended to the pocket. He likes to roll right. Get Jalen on the run vertically at the top of the pocket, make him lose depth, and make him either throw it away or Jalen will take bad sacks. Now, I'll say this. Jalen Milroe does not turn the football over, folks. He doesn't. He'll take bad sacks, get negative plays, but he does not turn the football over. And I would be a bit surprised if this isn't Glenn Schumann's Travaris Robinson, who's now the secondary coach, co-DC, who's been in Alabama the last 2 years, and Kirby Smart. I'd be shocked if that wasn't their game plan. And I think on the other side, Bama's going to utilize Milroe's legs more than Tommy Rees and Nick Saban did in design runs. With that being said, though, it's going to put more shots on Jalen Milroe's body. But I think that has loosened Jalen Milroe up, made him more comfortable, and let him be the quarterback he's been so far this year. And Kalen DeBoer likes to ride his playmakers. I mean, go back to last year. Michael Penix at the quarterback spot. Rome Odunze at the receiver spot. Jalen Polk at the receiver spot. Jalen McMillan at the receiver spot for the Huskies. He used to have Jake Hayner at Fresno State. He likes to put the rock in his playmakers' hands. However, I do think this game's going to be won on the other side of the football. We talked offense. We talked Georgia's defense. I think this game's going to come down to Carson Beck. Carson Beck's going to have to play the best game of his career to win this game. And I say this. I'd love to hear the comments. What is the biggest win in Carson Beck's career? Again, this isn't his fault. You can only play the schedule in front of you. Is it at Neyland last year? Is it against Ole Miss at home last year? I would say he lost the big one against Alabama and Atlanta last year. Florida State with their third strings does not count in the Orange Bowl. This is the biggest game he's been in, true road game. Georgia's going to go as Carson Beck ultimately goes. The defense can play well, but Carson Beck's going to have to play well for them to ultimately win this game. Go back to watch the Kentucky game, folks. He's very hesitant. This is what it takes to beat an Alabama team. Phenomenal quarterback play. But Georgia will have to establish some kind of run game with an offensive line that has struggled at times this year. And can an Alabama defensive front seven with guys like Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell at the linebacker spots keep the running game in check with 5 guys to be able to provide some help on the back end of the secondary that has some holes in it? They just haven't played a quarterback that can expose it. And to the same point, can Georgia's receivers take advantage of it? Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Arian Smith, Colby Young, maybe he steps up. Georgia misses RaRa Thomas, folks. Again, he had a domestic violence charge against a female. He should be for sure kicked off the team. But they miss him as a player on Saturdays. They do. And I think this game's ultimately going to come down to Carson Beck, the Georgia receivers, and also Mike Bobo versus Kane Womack, the Georgia OC versus Alabama DC. And then, of course, just like every Alabama-Georgia game, this game's going to come down to 3 to 4 plays. Who takes advantage of the explosive plays, which goes back to can Carson Beck take advantage of it? He looked a little timid last time he played an SEC team at Kentucky. And again, I was telling people don't make assumptions off the Kentucky game. I'm not, but you got to read between the lines a little bit. And like I said on the preview, go check it out on the SEC Unfiltered channel. Myself, Cole Thompson, Chris Phillips, we previewed it. If Georgia wasn't banged up on both sides of the line of scrimmage, I would probably lean Georgia. But give me Bama at home. I think the key difference here is Bama's defense stops the run of Nate Frazier, Trevor Etienne, guys like Tim Keenan up front, Jamarian Latham, Tim Smith, LT Overton. The Texas A&M transfer had a really good game on the edge. I think they're the difference. Give me Bama 31-27 in a little bit of a higher scoring affair than people are expecting. I think whoever gets to 31st wins this game. I'm telling you, folks, I think Carson Beck is the absolute key here. If he has a big game, which he could, because I think there's going to be opportunities, because Bama, all 3 weeks they've played so far, Western Kentucky with TJ Finley, Wisconsin before Tyler Van Dyke got hurt, and even the backup quarterback, and even Byron Brown at South Florida, they had opportunities. They just couldn't cash in. Remember, Bama's corners, 6 scholarship corners, 3 true freshmen. Those warts are going to rear their ugly head at some point. Georgia's aware of that. It's just, can Carson Beck take advantage of it in the biggest game of his college career, and probably his entire life? Remember, he was committed to Bama at one point at a Mandarin in Florida, in the Jacksonville area. He was committed to Alabama at a high school. Good baseball player, too, by the way. Going to the comments. UT bag gumps, baby. Appreciate you listening. Kirby has to win this game, not for his job, but their schedule's brutal. I'm with you. If Georgia loses this game, missing the playoffs isn't out of the picture. I'm not saying that, folks. No one go clip this. I'm just saying you still got at Texas, at Ole Miss, and you get Tennessee at home. You could lose all 3 of those games. Will you? Probably not, but they're all 3 very losable. And you already have 1 under your belt. You need to go win 2. You need to go win 2. Yeah. You need to go win 2. Cole S. Kirby. DeBoer gets a little leeway in year 1. Yeah, I agree. As long as DeBoer doesn't get blown out at home, no one's really going to hold this against him. I agree. UT bag gumps again needs curbs to design a defense to contain Milroe, then Tim Banks can add it too, and then we shut the gumps down. And he's already looking ahead to the 3rd Saturday in October. All right, moving on to the next game here. Kentucky at Ole Miss. Noon Eastern on ABC. Ole Miss minus 18 right now, favored by 18. Point total 53.5. Setting the tone outside of the 2 teams. Is there anyone more fired up than the Ole Miss season ticket holders? They've gotten Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Georgia Southern, and 3 to 4. They went on the road to Wake Forest. I mean, you feel like you've been robbed your first 3 games. I mean, you went through 3 home games of preseason, and now it's time to get into SEC play. Now, to be fair, Ole Miss has handled business against all 4 of those teams. Not a lot of teams can say that. Every week through the SEC so far, there's been a team that struggled to hold their water against a lesser opponent. But you can't say that about every team in the country. You can say that about Ole Miss. I talked up about the season ticket holders, but the players for Ole Miss have to be fired up to step up in this competition. Kentucky rolls in once again, coming in after their trip to Oxford in 2022, where Kentucky could have won that game if it wasn't for either a legal formation. I don't think either Dane Key or Barian Brown was on the line of scrimmage, if I remember right. Remember Will Levis threw the touchdown pass late in the game and he got called back. So Kentucky's a top 10 team when they rolled in for that. But the Cats are more battle tested than Ole Miss. They played a dominant South Carolina defensive front. Ole Miss, there's no denying that. Ole Miss has not really been tested yet. The Cats have been good on defense, outside of a few busts against South Carolina, but this is definitely Ole Miss's toughest task. The offense for Kentucky has been abysmal. Let's call it what it is, especially through the air. They have 0 passing touchdowns. Brock Vandagriff has not thrown a touchdown against Power 4 competition this year, either against Georgia or South Carolina, folks. They didn't have a passing touchdown last week against Ohio either. Brock Vandagriff, new OC, who came over from Boise, Bush Hamden, not getting off to the start they wanted, especially not what Mark Stoops wanted. But add in the Ole Miss defense is better, deeper under Lane Kiffin and Pete Golden than they've been. Expect an energized team, energized crowd, even though it's more in the brunch hour. Should be a good one. But what is going to happen, folks? The start of this game is going to be key. I was thinking about it today, talking to a buddy today. If Ole Miss gets up quickly, 14-17-0, this one will get out of hand. If Kentucky can settle into the game early, be good on first and second down offensively, they could be going into this one in the fourth quarter with an opportunity. Not saying they're going to win, just with an opportunity. If I'm Mark Stoops, that's the goal. Let's get it to the fourth quarter with a chance, guys. Now, on the other side of the ball, Kentucky's going to give up yards to Ole Miss. It's inevitable. Ole Miss is going to put up yards between the 20s on everyone. They're probably going to score from far on everybody. But Brad White, the Kentucky defensive coordinator, this Kentucky defense needs to be good in the red zone. Kentucky wants to see a lot of Ole Miss kicker Caden Davis, who actually signed at A&M when I was working at A&M from the Texas area. But a lot easier said than done. They're fine with giving up yards to Ole Miss. They want to hold them to field goals. Now, Kentucky has a very good defensive front. Deion Walker, probably the best interior defensive lineman in the league when he's playing hard with a high motor. You'll see that against Georgia. You'll probably see it this week against Ole Miss. He didn't show it against South Carolina at times. But I think that Kentucky defensive front will be locked in. Expect him to be locked in just like how they were against Georgia a couple weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, especially with the challenge in front of them. But I think this is why you see a little bit of that Jekyll Hyde performance from South Carolina to Georgia. I mean, I think Kentucky took that South Carolina game a little lightly. They got embarrassed. They hosted Georgia next week with nothing to lose. I think they kind of come in with that same mentality to Oxford this week. But with that being said, I think Ole Miss starts off hot. Kentucky maybe even settles in a little bit before the half. I think Kentucky is playing catch-up, though, the whole time. But if Kentucky isn't good on first and second down offensively and is in third and long often, this game will get out of hand. Won't even be close. Take Ole Miss, giving up the points in the 18. But I think Ole Miss is going to be challenged on offense like they haven't been for the entire season for most of this game. But Kentucky's inability to stay ahead of the chains ultimately catches up to them, allows Ole Miss to run away and hide by the middle of the third. I'm thinking something Ole Miss 34-10. Thinking Ole Miss something like 34-10. Any thoughts here in the chat room about that game, folks? UT Bags, again, Ole Miss fans ain't mad. Their schedule, they get them a soft Atlanta. Yeah, I mean, this is their first conference game, and those other games didn't really have anything to do with them getting to Atlanta. I do appreciate the comment, though, UT Bag Gums. But no, I mean, I think Ole Miss comes out pretty excited in this one. They kind of have to, right? I mean, what have you been waiting on for 4 weeks? Onins the Gray, he made it. He made it. Hey, he was late to the dance, but you know what? He still gets to get his dance in before it's all over. Stopped in to say, hey, men like me is why divorce rate is so high during college football season. What have I all missed? Chris Lowe joined us. We talked really everything. Georgia, Bama, Hugh Freeze, a little bit of Lane Kiffin going to Florida, the Florida job from a coach's perception standpoint. SEC through week 4 is what you missed so far, but appreciate you joining as always. Yeah, prayers for your family again. I remember you mentioned that last time out for the funeral. But yeah, Ole Miss, I don't know. I don't see any way Kentucky really has a chance in this game. The goal should be to get to the fourth quarter. I don't know if they will, though. I don't know if they will. The offense just Brock Vandagriff for them. I don't know if they can be consistent on first and second down and get in the third and manageables. Now, I think Ole Miss you can't contain them. At some point, the top of the lid's going to come off when you're playing the Ole Miss defense at some point. You almost got to hope you win it. You get them for 2 or 3 turnovers. That's really the best bet. But I think Ole Miss is going to handle this game. Give me Ole Miss 34-10. Oklahoma at Auburn. Oklahoma favored by 1 right now. Vegas thinks it's going to be a little closer. I do too. Point total 45.5. Oklahoma at Auburn, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. Like I said, Oklahoma -1 right now in the updated line right there. Let me get this down. And then the over point total 45.5 still like it was this morning. But setting the tone, where to even begin with this one? Auburn comes in 2-2, 0-1 in league play with their loss to Arkansas. Still have a quarterback competition that they're working out this week. Hank Brown, Peyton Thorne, Eileen Peyton Thorne. I think he gives you a threat in that run game. Must win for Auburn, though. If you want to go to a bowl game, Hugh Freeze and Auburn, this is the game you got to have. Oklahoma rolls in 3-1, 0-1 after taking a tough loss to Tennessee in the opener in Norman last week. Again, for Oklahoma, don't think it's as must-win for all as Auburn, but it is. It's still in the same category. It's a must-win. Let's call it what it is. The loser of this game is staring at 6-6. Best case, missing a bowl right now would be likely. It would. Honestly, I would say it is likely the loser does miss a bowl. We discussed Auburn's quarterback battle right now between Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown. Both have not been good at all. Thorne, 57% passer, 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Hank Brown, not as much action, but 62%, 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He was bad the other day, folks. I was there in person with the SEC Unfiltered Tour, saw it firsthand. Brent Venables announced on Monday at his coach's show. Michael Hawkins, who you saw for much of the second half against Tennessee on last Saturday, he's going to be the starter. True freshman making his first start at Jordan-Hare Stadium on Saturday afternoon. Hawkins, 61% passer, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 22 yards rushing last week. Like I said, first start on the road. It's going to be a tough task. My big question is, though, Seth Luttrell, the offensive coordinator, former North Texas head coach, has to incorporate a system that fits his quarterback. They're running too much of the RPO, run-pass option with Jackson Arnold. That doesn't fit Jackson Arnold's style of play, folks. You can't fit a square peg into a round hole. Tennessee defended that so well. It's essentially like the old triple option. Tennessee and Tim Banks were essentially just like, you know what? We're going to assign a man to everything. Because obviously this 2 + 2 = 4, but the run pass option is the quarterback has the option to run it. He has the option to give it to the running back. He has the option to read the linebacker and throw it if he comes. Tennessee accounted for all that. They played man on the back end with guys like Jermod McCoy. They assigned a guy for a running back. They assigned a guy for the quarterback. They assigned a guy to the receiver. And they were stunting and crossing. It was confusing. Jackson Arnold, he was like, oh, shoot, that's the guy I'm reading. But now he's circling around. If I keep it, he's right in my face. They need to dumb it down where, hey, he's not making decisions. Because Jackson Arnold has more upside than Michael Hawkins. Let's be honest. He probably fits a little bit better in a Jeff Lebby, Josh Heupel type system. You can't – everybody uses run-pass options right now, the RPOs. I'm not just picking on Seth Luttrell, but they're almost just banking on it. And that's asking a lot, man. You got to dumb it down. The best coaches fit their personnel. That's why I think Kalen DeBoer is so great with what he's done with Jalen Milroe. He isn't just stuck to his system. He plays to his personnel strengths. But moving to the other side, Oklahoma, top 3 to 4 defense in the entire league, kept them in the game last week versus Tennessee. Now, Josh Heupel did take off the gas a little bit, and I thought that was one of Heupel's better coach games. He just knew if they didn't turn the football over, I think those strip sacks of Nico scared him a little bit. They were going to win the football game. But Auburn, respectable group on defense. Thought DJ Durkin had a good plan last week against Taylon Green and Bobby Petrino, taking away the run game, forcing him to give that. Thought they'll have a good plan coming out this week too. But who knows with this game, if we're being honest? No one can confidently predict this game right now. But here we go. What's going to happen? This is going to turn into who makes the most mistakes offensively, folks. Let's call it what it is. Vegas has this as 45.5 point total, which I thought was a little high, but you also have to factor in there may be a defensive score or two in this game with the way these teams turn it. Well, not really Oklahoma, but the way Auburn turns it over. If Auburn keeps turning the football over at this rate, 14 turnovers through 4 games, it's not just on the quarterbacks. It's on the running backs too. Jarquez Hunter, Damari Alston had the big fumble heading into the end zone right before the half against Arkansas. It killed them. They put a lot of balls on the ground against Cal and New Mexico that they got back that don't even count in the stats. If you go look back and watch those games week to week like I do on Sundays, it's bad right now. If they keep doing that, this game won't be close. I don't care if I'm starting at quarterback for Oklahoma. But my point being, if you keep turning the football over, there's no way they win this game. I know Oklahoma's starting a true freshman. And don't forget, if it gets bad, we could see Jackson Arnold again. We could also see Jackson Arnold taking a red shirt next week, just like we saw with the UNLV quarterback. If Michael Hawkins looks good, this game could be all over the place, folks. But I lean Oklahoma here because I think Venables and Seth Luttrell built a safety game plan to put Hawkins or not put Hawkins in bad spots. However, that offensive line has struggled against everyone this year, including Temple and Houston. So that makes me a little scared, if I'm being honest. But Auburn is actually pretty good up front on defense. They're going to present challenges to Oklahoma. Oklahoma's got to dumb down the system. Don't make Michael Hawkins think so much. That's where he'll turn it over, give Auburn short field positions, and get you beat. I mean, nothing would piss me off more if I was Brent Venables than if Auburn's defense scored a touchdown on us and Auburn's offense, who is not good, is sitting there on the bench and Auburn's putting points on the scoreboard. But at the end of the day, Auburn has turned the ball over far too many times this year for me to trust them against one of the best defenses they will see all year. Give me Oklahoma 20-17. Don't feel great about it. Vegas obviously likes it right now. Thinks it'll be a close game. I think it will be too, but I think Oklahoma, I trust the defense more. That's the strength of this entire game. I trust them. I don't trust. I mean, I think Oklahoma's number one in the country in turnovers taken away. Auburn's last and giving them up. I'm going to go Oklahoma in a close one. Going back to the comments. UT Bags, if OU is more healthy, which I doubt because Tennessee hammered them kids, they're a sneaky good team. I think they shouldn't have pulled Arnold. Well, they need to dumb the system down, whatever they – again, you're right. It wasn't all on Arnold. The offensive line was bad. No one knew what they were doing. They were slide protecting the wrong way. It was one of the worst offensive performances I'd seen. I saw Joe Klatt go off about it too. It was bad. Go back and watch the film. Yeah, I mean, we're going to keep moving on in the previews, but I just want to check out some of those comments, see what anybody had to say. Moving on. Arkansas versus Texas A&M in Arlington. It's the last year, folks, at Jerry's World. I think Jerry Jones is tired of giving that trophy, the Southwest Classic trophy, to A&M every year. Remember, his alma mater is Arkansas. But 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN, Texas A&M currently favored by 5.5. It's went up. 52.5 point total. Set the tone, like I mentioned, last game in Jerry's World. Wild games have been a part of the series. When I worked at A&M, we won 2 of them. One in overtime because of Christian Kirk. And then it was Jimbo's first year. Well, we had to get an interception to win the game. So most of these games, outside of really last year, maybe one other have been close. A&M's won 11-12 in the series. Anyone who feels confident in this one is lying. They are lying to you. Who's starting quarterback for the Aggies on Saturday? I heard Marcel Reed's got the reps the whole week. It has been. I heard Connor Wigman has just been on the sideline rehabbing. So I think they roll with Marcel Reed. I think he fits Colin Klein's system better, the A&M offensive coordinator. But for Arkansas, can you limit the dumb mistakes and turnovers? You should be 4-0 right now if you do not go get yourself beat in the second half in Stillwater. They're 4-0. Springboard game to me here for both teams. Again, like I mentioned, I heard if Arkansas wins, College Game Day will be in Fayetteville next week when Tennessee comes to town. And then maybe they go back to College Station for the Missouri-Texas A&M game if A&M were to win. But what is going to happen? Look, this is going to sound cliche, but whomever makes the least amount of mistakes in this game will win, whether it's critical penalties, missed tackles, which A&M hadn't been good at recently, along with giving up explosive runs like you saw against Notre Dame. They have to shore that up if they want to change. But this will be the best defense Arkansas, Taylon Green, and Bobby Petrino have faced so far, and it's the best offense A&M's faced. How does Mike Elko attack Taylon Green and Bobby Petrino? And on the other side, A&M's going to have some form of a passing game from Marcel Reed to win this game. Who steps up at wide receiver to help Marcel Reed? Is it Noah Thomas? Is it Ja'Day Walker? Is it Jabri Walker, who transferred over from Louisiana Tech? Someone needs to step up. They didn't have to do that in Gainesville against Florida because they controlled the line of scrimmage. They didn't have to do that again in a close one against Bowling Green because they can control the line of scrimmage. I think Travis Williams, the defensive coordinator for Arkansas, is going to sell out for this. They're going to make them beat them through the air. At least that's what I would do. That's what any good coordinator would do. But the positive thing, hear me out here, for A&M is Marcel Reed doesn't seem real turnover prone. You can tell by the way my comments are, and I've worked in college football, I hate turning the football over. I know you do too as fans. I know coaches do as well. But we don't talk enough about that. I was talking to somebody in the industry, and they're like, I think Arkansas wins that one alone. It's like, and they thought Auburn would win too. It's like, yeah, they easily could. But I was like, they just turn the football over and make so many mistakes. I just can't trust them right now. Marcel Reed hasn't turned the ball over, hasn't really been put in opportunities to. But I can't say the same about Taylon Green and Arkansas's offense right now. 5 turnovers overall in their 2 biggest games against Oklahoma State and Auburn. I just think somehow, some way, Texas A&M gets this done because I don't like turnovers. I trust teams that are more disciplined to get the job done. I just think Arkansas, until I see it, finds a way to lose this game. And give Arkansas credit last week on the Plains. In that late third quarter, early fourth quarter, those back-to-back drives, they made big third-down conversions. To Andrew Armstrong, whether it was by penalty late, Taylon Green picking up yards with his legs. They got it done last week. Give Taylon Green, Bobby Petrino, and them credit. And I do think Taylor Green's going to only get better as the year goes on, but he's also going to have his mistakes as well. Again, I don't feel great about this one either. I really don't feel great about either pick, honestly, in the Arkansas A&M game, in the Auburn Oklahoma game. It's just going to come down to simple mistakes, turnovers, key penalties. I think Arkansas finds a way to lose this one. I just think Mike Elko is going to scheme up Taylor Green and throw a lot of things at him that he hadn't seen before. And I think A&M probably leaves +2 in turnover margin. I think they leave Arlington for the last time in the series before it goes to campus 27-24. I think A&M 27-24 in this one. Any comments in here? On to the grade. We had a good plus minus until the 3 turnovers on Tennessee, especially leaving that one. Yeah, those Jackson Arnold turnovers, unacceptable. UT bags Gumps. Wigman has been hurt too long to progress. He had a great upside, but he's also hurt. Wigman likely looks good against grass and time, but it doesn't translate like Joe Milton. Yeah, for sure. Connor Wigman at like a pro day combine type thing would work laps around Marcel Reed. But I think with the way Colin Klein likes to utilize quarterbacks, going back to his K-State days, even as a player back 2012, when he had Skylar Thompson, when he had Will Howard, he likes to run the quarterback. It's within his system. Connor Wigman is not comfortable doing that. That's why I always thought it was an interesting offensive coordinator hire for Mike Elko. And it came down to, I think, Mike Denbrock, the former LSU OC, who's now at Notre Dame, and Colin Klein, from what I heard from talking to people over there. So it's just an interesting hire. I think Marcel Reed gives him the best chance to win this game. But overall, it comes down to turnovers. In these 2 games, Oklahoma and Auburn, and Texas A&M Arkansas, mistakes and turnovers. It sounds cliche, but it is true in this one. Last big preview here, guys. Mississippi State at Texas. Texas currently favored by 37.5. Overall point line, 61.5 point total. 4:15 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network, setting the tone. SEC opener for Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns. Now, to be fair, it's against the worst team in the league. Let's call a spade a spade. That is no offense to Jeff Lebby. I'm sure he'd probably think they're probably the worst team in the league right now in his first-year Bulldog team. But we do not sugarcoat things on this show. They're a bad football team right now. The line is 38, people, for a conference game. ULM didn't get it. Was almost at this line last week. Add in Mississippi State will be starting true freshman Michael Van Buren, who I do like on tape, to be honest with you, going back. Where's he from? St. Francis Academy in Baltimore. I thought he put good film on. I think he has a good future. But they lost Blake Shapen last week, broke his leg, and they struggled across the board this year. Your best player, like I mentioned, Blake Shapen's out for the year. Not a lot going on for the Bulldogs right now. If you're going to this game as a Mississippi State fan, you're probably looking forward to the barbecue. But on the other side, Quinn Ewers listed as questionable on the injury report. Do we see Arch Manning get the start in his SEC action? Does he try to go get a win for Eli and Archie against Mississippi State? All jokes aside there, I had to throw that one in there. But I could see Sark wanting to get Ewers some reps before the bye week, and then you were right into the fire off the bye week against Oklahoma. Give or take, I don't care about their offensive situation. Brent Venables, Zach Alley will have a plan against Steve Sarkisian and them offensively, and then Georgia the next week. Not discounting this game, but that is the main storyline here on this one. Does Quinn Ewers start, or is it Arch Manning? But what is going to happen? I mean, I think it depends on who starts at quarterback. Like I mentioned, Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning. Texas could run the football to a victory here if they wanted to. They could throw the ball Greg McElroy style in the 2009 national championship game against Texas 11 times. They could run to victory here. I mean, they could. Jarrett Gibson, Jaden Blue, Contravian Wisner could all have big games. I mean, in Mississippi State's 3 losses, defensive coordinator Coleman Hutzler, who I thought was a bad hire in the first place, and his defense is giving up to Arizona State 346 on the ground. Chaz Scadaboo had 275 himself. Toledo 169 on the ground, and Florida 226 last week. Giving up numbers on the ground. And as you can tell by those numbers, State's getting absolutely walloped on the ground, and the scheme doesn't help either. Think it's a bad hire. Thought it was a CAA Jimmy Sexton hire more so than the better hire. I'm also looking at how Michael Van Buren plays for State. I liked his film out of high school. But does Jeff Lebby go into this game kind of being like, hey, we got to set our freshman quarterback up for fail. We can't be going to sling it around as much as I want. This is a perception game for Jeff Lebby, too. You want to stay within the spread. Big donors, big boosters, those people care about that. The big money people, they're not the brightest football minds that really know what goes on within these programs or what it takes to win. Yeah, they know the cash dollar, the green wins. But also they care like, hey, let's don't get beat by 40 against Texas. I know they're a lot better than us, but if he can stay within that 38, perception-wise, that would help. And I think Jeff Lebby's a smart enough guy to know that. So he's going to try to help out his freshman quarterback, Michael Van Buren. But perception is big in year one, and he needs to look organized and respectable. Ultimately, Horns are too much. Expect a lot of rushing yards on the ground for the Horns, forced turnovers, and a big SEC opening win for Sark and the boys. Give me Texas 52-10. There's not a lot to talk about in this one. It's an SEC game, but I think the big storyline is it Archer Quinn? It gets the start there. Because I could see Sark wanting to get Quinn's feet wet before they go into another bye week, before Oklahoma and Georgia, before you really start hitting the railroad, before you start really putting your work in to kind of get to Atlanta for an SEC championship. UT Bags, if Quinn isn't fully healthy, no reason to start Quinn. No, I would agree with you. I'd heard Sark was really itching to kind of get him some reps this week. Maybe he starts, they get up big, and they let Arch carry it out just to get him some game reps. Because at that point, he'd be, 3 weeks heading into Red River and then Georgia the next week without playing? Not ideal. But, yeah, I think Texas gets the 52-10 win. Rest of the league, you got what's that line right now? You got 7:45 Eastern on the SEC Network. South Alabama at LSU. LSU currently favored by 20.5 to point total 65.5. South Alabama, Major Applewhite, they can put up some points. They also lost to Ohio. LSU's defense will be the thing to watch here. Again, Harold Perkins, Jacobian Guillory out for the year. Probably their two biggest guys on defense they couldn't afford to lose are now out on a defense that's going to give up explosive plays. They're going to be aggressive as well. If I'm an LSU fan, I'm watching how my defense plays. How have we changed some schemes around with losing our two most important players on the defense? I'll be interested in watching that. I think the offense will go do what it's supposed to do. But remember, South Alabama put up 80 points against, I know, their last Louisiana team they played, Northwestern State. South won last week, right? Didn't they? They're 2-2 rolling into this thing. Yeah, they lost to North Texas, lost to Ohio, beat Northwestern State, and they rocked App State last Thursday night. Yeah, I remember watching that. Yeah, so they're 2-2. It'll be a good challenge for LSU defensively, though. They need all the help they can get. They didn't play great last week against UCLA. But just want to talk about that one. Expect LSU to win. Would it shock you at the end of the day if South backdoor covered the 20.5? Sure. But I think the key to keep an eye on if you're an LSU fan or a college football fan in general, just keep an eye on that LSU defense because they have an off week next week, and then the big one. Ole Miss coming to Tiger Stadium in prime time. But last thing before we get you out of here, guys, I got to give it to you. Money-making weekend, week 5. Let's get to it. We're 18-27 on the season right now. We're not sugarcoating it. I'm going to be honest with my record. But again, like I told you, week 4, week 5 is where I start to make my move. We had some good wins last week, 4-6, 5-5. But I felt good. Even the ones I lost, I would go back on. I mean, I lost the Ole Miss point total by 0.5 point. I lost a game 2 weeks ago in the Texas ULM game last week because of a touchdown ran back. I took the under in a fumble returned, beat me, put the over. I would take a lot of my bets again, but 18-27, we have to get better, but all is not bad. I got 9 good ones for you. Starting off, Miami team total tomorrow night against Virginia Tech at Hard Rock Stadium. Give me Miami the over 36.5 team total. I think this is Miami's next big game with Cam Ward that they're going to want to go show on national television on Friday night against a former Big East opponent, Virginia Tech. I like the Hurricanes over 36.5. K-State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. Give me the under 55.5. I think K-State slows this down. What are they doing at the quarterback spot with Avery Johnson? I think Oklahoma State tries to get Ollie Gordon going with that offensive line. I think this is an under game. Give me that game, K-State, Oklahoma State, under 55.5. A lot of over-unders here, folks. I like the team totals. Notre Dame, Louisville. Both offenses not very good. Give me the under here. I like the under 45 there. Alabama plus 2.5. Picked them to win the game straight up. Give me the 2.5 points as well against Georgia and Bryant-Denny Stadium. I talked about that one already. Ohio State, kind of how I figured with Oregon a couple weeks ago when I took Oregon to cover Oregon State after taking in the week before to cover against Boise and I lost. But Ohio State giving up 23.5 to Michigan State. I think this is the Buckeyes coming out party. Give me Ohio State big. I think they cover the 23.5 going into an SEC game. Auburn, Oklahoma, under 46.5. Don't feel as confident as I did, but still feel like the play in this one, you got to go under. Both teams have quarterback issues. I think Oklahoma's going to be real conservative. I don't think Auburn is because I think they're going to want to kind of attack and kind of feel a presence against Oklahoma. But I think the under 46.5 is the way to go. 3 more bets. Michigan, Minnesota, under 36 here. I don't trust either quarterbacks with Orgy or Minnesota's on their third team quarterback as well. Under 36. Keep fading Kent State, folks. That's how I've been winning. This will be 3 weeks in a row. Kent State team total. Go under 14.5 against Eastern Michigan. I think Kent State, I was looking it up today, playing with their back third string quarterback who was hurt, got hurt on the last play of the game, I think, last week against Penn State. And then finally, Clemson minus 13.5 first half against Stanford. Stanford had the big win against Syracuse. I think Clemson, like Chris said, I think it's going to be Clemson-Miami in the ACC championship game. I think Clemson comes out firing at home. But those are the 9 bets I gave you, recapping them, guys. Miami team total 36 over Virginia Tech, primetime spot. Mario Cristobal, Cam Moore to give it to me. I think they're going to want to put up some points. K-State, Oklahoma State under 55.5. I think K-State's going to want to slow the game down. I think you see more Ollie Gordon. Give me the under 55.5. Notre Dame, Louisville, 2 bad offenses. Give me the under 45. Bama, going to straight up win. I like a money line. Give me the 2.5 points at home against Georgia. Ohio State, coming out party like for Oregon 2 weeks ago against Oregon State. They're giving up 23.5 to a bad Jonathan Smith and Michigan State team in his first year. Give me Ohio State minus 23.5. Auburn, Oklahoma, offensive struggles across the board there. Quarterback issues, 2 solid defenses, 1 really good defense. Under 46.5. Michigan, Minnesota, under 36. 2 real limited offensive teams. And then Kent State, fade Kent State. Maybe the worst team in FBS, under 14.5. Third string quarterback who is already injured, facing an Eastern Michigan team that's pretty good. And then Clemson, I think, comes out firing minus 13.5 in the first half against Stanford. I feel good about this one this week, folks. I do. I feel really good about this one. UT Gumps, let's get involved, guys. Put your thoughts and questions. Dave will chat with you. Yes, I will. Put it in here, guys. Again, Dave Shoemate, former personnel guy in the SEC, director of recruiting at other schools in the across the country as well. Kansas with Les Miles, UCF with Gus Malzahn. I'll answer your questions as well. UT Bag Gumps, I'm going to put my trust in you this weekend. I feel like you've seen enough ball to know how teams are rolling this year. UT Gumps, baby, you're putting UT Bag Gumps. You are putting pressure on me here, but I feel good about week 5. I'm glad you're hopping on board. Is the Gumps on the background of this? Is on the end of this game? Are you in Alabama somewhere? Are you a Tennessee fan in Alabama? UT Gumps. Yeah, man, that's it after the comments there. But UT Gumps right, guys. I love to chat with y'all, and I appreciate UT Bag Gumps joining us every night, just like with Ons of the Gray as well. But, guys, we covered a ton today. We had Chris Lowe, college football ESPN senior writer, come in. We talked about the Florida job right now. We talked Georgia, Alabama this upcoming weekend, Showdown in T-Town. We talked about Lane Kiffin potentially going to Florida. We talked about Hugh Freeze, year 2, what this sets up. They're going to set the quarterback market heading into year 3. We talked about just what the SEC looks like. Is it a 5-team league now? Everything. He joined us for 30 minutes. He was gracious with his time. I gave you my predictions for all the SEC matchups, the 5 conference matchups. We talked a little LSU, South Alabama. And I gave you my 9 picks for the money-making weekend, guys. We're all aboard the money train this week. It starts this week, guys. There's no holding back. UT Bag Gumps on board. That's all I need to know, folks. But again, guys, Dave Shoemate, longtime college football personnel director in the SEC and other places in college football. This is Dave Talks Ball, folks. Join us every Monday and Thursday. Mondays, we're recapping these games, talking narratives. Thursday, we're predicting these games, and I get fired up about it. We have a guest on once a week. I appreciate you guys joining us on this show. Again, guys, go like, subscribe, hit that notification bell on everything SEC Unfiltered. We have content coming out of the bleeding out the eyeballs. Chris Phillips already in Birmingham and Hoover right now, waiting to get to Tuscaloosa for the SEC Unfiltered tour. We may be in Fayetteville next week, too, if Arkansas wins, by the way. Just give you a little heads up there where the SEC Unfiltered tour may be as well, guys. But again, we're going to have post-game reactions, myself and Cole Thompson. Give or take, the power doesn't go out here in Atlanta from the hurricane hammering Florida. Keep those people in your prayers as well. But don't forget to join us for all the reaction shows after each game. We're going to have probably all 4 of them from the SEC game, probably outside of maybe the Mississippi State-Texas game. We wouldn't. Who knows? If that comes down to the wire, we will definitely do that one as well. But, guys, I appreciate you joining us on this Thursday night. If you're in the Southeast, stay safe. Make sure you got your shelter. I appreciate you spending your Thursday night with me. You have a phenomenal weekend.